Professor Dr. Andrew Lian from the Suranari University of Technology, Thailand, I hope I said that correctly, Ho Chi Minh City Open University, Vietnam, Professor Emeritus, University of Canberra, Australia. He specializes in developing frameworks for learning foreign and second languages and has had a special and ongoing interest in the uses of modern technology to enhance language learning since the late 1970s. He's one of the pioneers of modern technology-enhanced language learning in Australia. He has occupied several full professorial leadership positions in Australia, and he has occupied several full professorial leadership positions in Australia and the United States. His current research interests include neuroscience, the interface between perception and learning, perception and cerebral lateralization as they relate to language learning, as well as self-adjusting and self-organizing language and cultural learning systems based on rhizomatic principles, including the generation of personalized learning environments. These approaches necessarily rely on modern technology, including multi-model systems and personalized feedback mechanisms. More details about him can be found at his website, and he has also published widely and is on the editorial board of several academic journals. Currently, he serves as president of Asia Call, known as the Asia Association of Computer-Assisted Language Learning. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure to welcome Emeritus Professor Dr. Andrew Lian.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted particularly to be here because mentorship, postgraduate students, research are the lifeblood of the world, not the academic world, but the world as a whole. And although I'll do a more formal thank in a minute, I also wanted to point out that, yes, of course, this is a time to chill. It's also a time to dream. I always tell my graduate students that, you know, they all come and they're all excited about becoming a PhD students, and they're going to work hard, it's going to be miserable, and it's going to be tough, and so on. But the reality is that if they do this right, they will just love it. But they have to have the dream, and they have to have a kind of understanding of how that kind of world works. So give yourself a break. Join us here today. So I'm going to share my screen. Obviously, you can hear me, so that's a good sign. I'll try to make sure that you can also hear my presentation because I'm going to use a couple of recordings. So let's see. So we'll share the entire screen. Yes. What else? Share the sound. Optimize for video. I don't know, I guess. Oh, you're seeing that screen. All right. So I'd better show you my PowerPoint. It's breakfast time in Thailand. Oh, okay. So I've entitled my talk, How Can This Be? Because I'm going to report on some strange things that are perhaps a little unusual in the world of applied linguistics. How can this be? Surprises from the world of language education. Well, up to you to tell me if they are surprising. Perhaps they are. I hope so. I've got a little clock on the top right-hand corner. I don't normally have this, but it'll keep me on track. I've got a lot of stuff to go through. I'll probably accelerate pretty rapidly, and we can always talk again if you are inclined to do so. So it really is my very great privilege to participate in this inaugural MAAL International Postgraduate and Early Careers Researchers Symposium. Nurturing the next generation of researchers, that is the key. And I would like to thank the Malaysian Association of Applied Linguistics, specifically my friend and partner in Asia Call at one stage, Professor Dr. Shamim Rafiq Galea, President of MAAL, and also Emeritus Professor Azira Hashim, Advisor to MAAL, and Dr. Ina Bhattacharya, chair of the organizing committee, and her whole team. She's right, you know, without the team, nothing's going to work. So thank you very much. Members of the executive, of course. And I am profoundly honored and really touched to work on the next generation. It's a deep, deep concern for me, and I get very worried about the shape of research at the moment, to tell you the truth. So because we're looking into the future, I wanted to draw your attention to some unusual areas of research, and I think some surprising findings. They're things that I've done with my students and I've done with my colleagues, and to have a bit of intellectual fun with concepts. I think fun is important, and intellect is important, because we are too often blocked by dogma. So some preliminaries, and I wanted to explain to you. The work that I'll report is the result of studies performed by people working either with me or similar areas and according to the same principles. They all work with me in some way. So this is not reporting on the rest of the universe, just my little corner of it. Now, although we work in similar areas, we don't necessarily do exactly the same thing or think exactly the same thing, but it's a little bit like large labs in the sciences, where everybody is kind of unified by a general project that they are undertaking. And that adds energy and variety, and it goes toward change. So second, I wanted to point this out. Although we all love language, our primary research focus is not on language as such. It's not linguistics. It's not on describing language. It's not descriptive. It is pedagogic and therefore conceptual in many ways. So we also share some theoretical principles that roughly revolve around some general areas, supplemented by 3 specific theories. And I'll talk about those theories in a moment. I hope it's not going to be boring. So people usually groan when they hear about theories. Anyway, so theories of meaning, theories of knowledge, theories of learning. And learning is one of the principles that we have is meaning is personal, knowledge is personal, learning is personal, but can be socially supported, of course, and includes neuroscience. For example, brain lateralization studies. Key people like McGilchrist, Guberina, Ramachandran, Damasio, Panksepp, Imordino Yang, they are all key people in the world of neuroscience and being, and also can be applied to learning and learning languages specifically, as we're going to see in a few minutes. And the other thing that I've been working a lot on, and for many years in one sense or another, and that is the interface between perception and learning. And I'll talk about that again in a moment. The interface between perception and learning. This is not trivial. And finally, load reduction, but not necessarily John Sweller's cognitive load theory, load reduction theory, although perhaps as well. So theory number 1 is called verbotonal theory. Right? You've all heard of it, right? No, okay, maybe not. It's not a new theory, but it's reviving. It's reviving. It's going through a renewal, and partly because of the work we're doing here in Asia and in Australia. And Asia means roughly Thailand, Vietnam, China, Indonesia. So it's a perceptually driven approach to foreign language learning that emphasizes intonation, rhythm, and prosody over individual phonemes. Now, I'm going to be talking about pronunciation, what seems to be pronunciation, but actually it isn't pronunciation. It includes pronunciation, but is really about that connection between perception and learning. It is also a theory of perception, and therefore it is necessarily a theory of meaning. And, you know, we can argue about that later if you want to. The theory integrates kinesthetic elements and multimodality. So it's not just about words and grammar or phonemes or pronunciation or whatever it is, as you will see in a minute, much broader than that. So we're using verbotonalism to investigate the interface between perception and learning. We are conscious that any act of learning requires an act of meaning-making on the part of learners. We are also conscious that perception is the first line of engagement with the world and filters what is allowed to reach our brain for further processing. People say, oh, well, the mother tongue interferes. Well, it doesn't actually, the mother tongue actually doesn't interfere. What happens is that there are some perceptual barriers which are created by the things that we already know. So perception, therefore, has a gatekeeping function where where understood or familiar signals are kept. You keep and strengthen the things you have, and you reject the things that are not familiar. And to make matters more complicated, the knowledge we already have can act as a barrier to the knowledge that we want to get. How about that? So let me tell you a bit more about verbotonalism. It has many techniques for raising learners' awareness of pronunciation and other phenomena, but awareness raising is a key component of learning within the theory of knowledge construction and learning, on which our research is partly based. And I've got a whole bunch of references there. So Gattegno, of course. Gattegno was an interesting person and never really properly understood. Me, Lian and Sangarun, Lian and Sussex, Mason, Schmidt, and so on. For further epistemological details, you can see these guys. Traditional verbotonalism relies on a combination of large and small body movements, dance movements, symbolic representations of sounds by teachers, as well as techniques. A specific technique where speech is filtered, and you'll hear that in a minute, using analog or digital filters. In recent times, we have chosen to focus on audio filtering, or I have chosen to focus on audio filtering only, rather than multimodality, because I wanted to remove one of the possible confounding variables of the work. Now, if you've never heard low-pass filtered language before, I'm going to give you an example. I hope you can hear it. Somebody please tell me when I play it. Please tell me if you can hear it. Maybe our host. So that's an ear. The low-pass filtering is done at 320 hertz. What it means is we cut off all frequencies above 320 hertz. And the top line, the top graph is a speech representation. It's a spectrogram where you can see the intonation curve in blue, and you can see there's a lot of stuff, a lot of frequencies, a lot of formants above the blue lines. In the bottom picture, it's all white above a certain line, and that's 320 hertz. Now, let's listen to the first one. It's me, by the way. You will recognize me, and I've done a particularly stupid pronunciation thing so that you can hear the intonation variation. Oops. Come on.
Hello, how are you?
Can you hear that? Someone tell me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. Hello, how are you? How do you think it's going to sound filtered? Anyone? You can turn your microphones on and talk if you want to. No one's going to talk. All right, fine. That's one of the problems with online stuff. Here's the filtered version. Oh, it's particularly quiet. Try again. Did you hear that?
Yes,
You did? What did you
Yes.
hear?
but very
It's
muffled.
muffled. Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Yes.
Try again. Gosh. All right. Well, I don't know because I can't hear it. So I'll tell you what it should sound like. It should sound like
That's exactly what it sounds like. Bob.
Good. That's what a filtered sentence in low pass filter sounds like. What do you think that is? Anyone want to guess what it is?
No idea.
It's actually the intonation of the voice. Because, okay, well, it's the intonation of the voice, which means that we have just filtered and kept what's called F0, the first formant of the voice, which is the intonation curve produced by the vocal cords. All right, so what? Low-pass filtering releases the prosodic structures of utterances and makes them more salient. So, if you do this as an exercise, not as an oddity, we're doing it now as something a bit strange, right? But if you do it as an actual exercise, it gets less strange and more interesting in terms of learning. Another thing that, apart from making it more salient, is it targets the right brain and arguably has the potential to lower the processing load. The third thing it does is it impacts the body as a whole, the whole body. And if you do this in a big room with big speakers, you can feel the vibrations. If you can imagine, you're in a pop concert somewhere and somebody's playing a drum through large speakers, you can feel it resonating through your whole body. And that is the low frequencies hitting you. High frequencies don't do that. But it's not only low-pass filtering that can be used. We can also use a thing called band-pass filters to identify what are called perceptual optimals, which are frequencies where we best hear particular sounds and phonemes. So in traditional verbotonal theory, these band-pass filters consist of octave-wide frequency bands. An octave, if you don't remember, is a spectrum of frequencies where the bottom frequency is, where the top frequency is twice that of the bottom frequency. But don't worry about it. We're not going to do, we could spend hours talking about this, but we're not going to do that now. In traditional verbotonalism, each language has its own set of optimal frequencies for native speakers. Don't tell me about ELF. I know about ELF. And also corrective optimals, according to the linguistic group attempting to learn the pronunciation of the new language. So we can help people listen better by changing their perception. That's the idea. So we're extending these studies, however, to make the concepts more accurate, because they're not accurate, they haven't been accurate enough. So that's theory one. Theory number two is rhizomatic learning. If you've never heard of rhizomatic learning, well, you have now. Deleuze and Guattari, especially moment-to-moment interventions, which is something that I worry about a lot. So Lian 2004, Lian and Sangaroon 2017, 2023. It emphasizes a non-linear approach to learning that reflects learner needs. If you want to avoid the word rhizomatic learning, you can talk about self-directed learning, but it's not quite the same thing. Point is that it rejects predetermined rigid structures in favor of fostering learners' autonomy and adaptability. And they can navigate and construct their own pathways through diverse linguistic and cultural contexts. The third one is the approach values moment-to-moment needs of learners. Moment-to-moment needs. I have a need now and I need to fix it now. How can I do that? Because if I delay fixing it, then I'm going to get into other trouble. And what does that do to the syllabus? Rhizomatic learning encourages learners to develop skills organically guided by preference and need, and it shifts the role of teachers from knowledge providers to environment facilitators. And you may have heard of Sugata Mitra's work on self-organizing learning environments, it's similar to that. Let me go on a little bit. Don't worry about this. This is just there for advertising, really, to tell you that there are some new publications on rhizomatic learning. But there is one thing that may be interesting, which is that society at the moment, there are multiple convergent factors in the collective unconscious of modern society, and I think this is quite interesting, that justify the growing inclination for rhizomatic learning models and personalized solutions. For example, all the stuff that we do on our own on the internet, all the stuff that we do on Google, all the stuff we now do on ChatGPT, contribute to our independence and contribute to our personalization of knowledge and contribute to our research development. we're all kind of becoming researchers. Theory number 3 is precision language education, which is something we invented in 2017. It's actually published in JAMA at UKM, and focuses on tailoring language to the unique biological, perceptual, cognitive, and emotional needs of individual learners. I'm not saying we've done it. It's a concept that we need to research. It emphasizes diagnostic approaches to identify specific areas of difficulty and uses targeted interventions to address them. It also says that language learning involves more than cognitive processes. It integrates biological and sensory factors to create a holistic learner-centered approach. Now, precision language education is based initially on precision medicine. Precision medicine is a reaction against traditional medicine, which offers kind of one-size-fits-all approaches to treatment. Precision medicine, on the other hand, does DNA searches and it adapts to the blood and so on in a much more precise way. I'm not going to spend much time on it. I think you get the idea. Precision language education is a research-based refinement of individualization and feeds directly into adaptive learning. It goes beyond the processes that we generally offer in our teaching organizations. And we'll see an example shortly. Assuming we have time, I think we will. The concern with personalization in general, I've talked about briefly. It's everywhere. We are all involved in this. Accompanying the change is the understanding that learners engaged in complex learning tasks experience moment-to-moment difficulties that need to be solved quickly. And closely connected with this, of course, is the concept, or the two concepts of just-in-time and just-in-case learning, with a shift occurring away from just-in-case in favor of just-in-time. So nowadays, there is so much information that we cannot possibly learn it all. It's going to be outdated within two years, roughly. And learning it all and keeping it in our heads may or may not be possible or even desirable. What we do have, however, is ways of finding the information that we need when we need it. So these specific theories are supplemented by other theoretical things. And in case you wonder where the technology of computer-assisted language learning is, because I'm connected with AsiaCall, well, the answer is that it is everywhere. Okay. Now, I'll spend the rest of the presentation sharing with you the outcomes of some of our research and ask the question afterwards, how can this be? Now, you don't have to, if you're happy with the outcomes, then you don't have to ask the question, how can this be? But lots of people tend to think, oh, it's a bit strange. And time is going to be of the essence. If you find these stories interesting, we could talk about them later. And I will have to go fairly quickly. So, project number 1, Professor Dr. Herby, published inter alia in this one here. It's a critically important project. Why is it critically important? Well, because, and this is a good lesson for people doing postgraduate research. She is the one who insisted on doing this project with me. She is the one who insisted on doing something that was unusual and not in the mainstream. And many people tried to dissuade her from doing it, and actually it turns out to be okay in the end. But if she hadn't done it, then probably this whole talk wouldn't have happened, because this talk is derived partly from her efforts to be different. So Herby tested this. Is it possible to teach the pronunciation of English phonemes to Chinese university students by teaching prosody only, using low-pass filtered language and dancing, with no intervention from teachers, using call, there you go, and face-to-face delivery? Performances were judged against a standard pronunciation class taught in the usual way. So we have control group and experimental group structure. And here you have the students. Actually, you have two groups of students in this picture. In the top left-hand corner and bottom right-hand corner, you have the Chinese students in Herbie's group. They are dancing to the tune of the intonation patterns that they are listening to. So the learning process involved is you listen to the melody, which is the filtered intonations, and then you dance to it in whatever way you feel comfortable with. You can jump up and down, you can have big movements or little movements, you can wave your finger, or you can just sit there and do nothing. So that was the idea. And the question is this going to help you pronounce the phonemes better? Well, of course, if I'm telling you the story, the answer is yes. This is not something which verbotonalism hasn't said before, but it is certainly something which hasn't been done in China, and it is certainly something that has relatively little data associated with it. Project number 2, Dr. Yang Yan, they're both full professors now in China, similar to Herbie, but broader. After 18 weeks, experimental group improved. I'm not going to go into it in detail. We can talk about all of these things later. The experimental group improved significantly in both overall speaking proficiency and individual tests: word reading, sentence reading, singing and oral interview, and 5 sub-skills. The experimental group also outperformed the control in all aspects tested. And interestingly, I add this just for fun, the experimental group topped the district examinations, whereas the control group obtained only an average score. And a lot of the stuff that they were tested on was actually never taught in class, directly at least. But an important bonus of this was that phonological working memory of the experimental group was significantly greater than that of the control group. So the work done was not only about getting them more fluency, better intelligibility, better pronunciation in general, but it also increased their phonological working memory, which means that it increased their ability to process better. So just listening to intonation and dancing to it can help pronunciation. How can this be? Well, it is. And we can talk about that. This is not, it can't be part of this conversation. But here's another one from China, Dr. Li Zhongmin. And this was a project, okay, I'll show you. Also published in JAMA, by the way. This was also a project designed to teach intonation, but in a special or different way. For 6 weeks, both experimental and control group did what? Simple listen and repeat compared drills in a teacherless setting, right? You've got to picture this. There is no teacher, there is no class, there is no person telling you what to do. They just do listen, repeat, and compare drills in a teacherless setting. Control used native speaker models. However, anyone want to guess what we used for the experimental group? Microphones on. Anyone want to try?
AI?
Huh?
Any AI? Maybe some AI?
No.
Some...
No, this was before AI. This was, well,
Oh.
not before AI, but before ChatGPT.
Oh.
This is 2022, 2020. Okay.
Oh.
The experimental group used here's the thing. The experimental used their own corrected voices. Right? They heard their own voice, but the voice was corrected synthetically to have the correct intonation. And we added a secret component as models for practice. Right? So instead of hearing native speakers, they heard their own voice corrected for let's call it native speaker models, and a secret component as models for practice. You want to guess what the secret component was? Anyone? I'll tell you later. Okay. The experimental outperformed the control group significantly, and it's all done, by the way, with blind ratings. All of these studies are done with blind ratings. The people don't know if the raters, if there are any, don't know if they are testing pre-test, post-test, experimental or control. Now, of course, with voice cloning becoming available, and automatic pitch analysis software becoming available, this will be usable for teacherless self-managed call in the future. Here are the results. If you want to have a look, we don't have time for it, but if you look at the significance on the right, they're all 0.0 except for one, which is a miserable 0.03. So for all of the questions and so on that were used, there was a significant difference between control and experimental. The effect sizes were large too. I just didn't put them in. So the question is, just listening to your own voice gives you an advantage? That's interesting. How can this be? And what was the secret ingredient? I'll tell you what the secret ingredient was. The secret ingredient was that we amplified low frequencies in the lower than 320 hertz range. And why does this matter, you say? Well, think about it. We might talk about it in the, not the Q&A, in the whatever, the coffee session or whatever it's called. Or maybe I'll just tell you. It's just that when we listen to ourselves speak, the idea was to recreate in people's heads a model that was similar to what they hear when they speak and open their mouth. When they open their mouth and speak, we hear ourselves. When we hear ourselves differently from the way in which the rest of the world hears us. And the reason for that is that we hear ourselves largely through our bones in our head and not just through the air. And what that does is it acts as a filter and adds low frequencies to our voices. So this is one of the reasons why when we hear ourselves on a tape recorder or whatever, we always find it a little bit strange because it doesn't sound the same as in our heads. So we added the secret ingredient, which was low frequencies. How about this one? Lu Tim IV, my student in Vietnam, listening skills development, connecting prosody and listening. So this wasn't about pronunciation. This was about improving people's perceptions of intonation and prosody in relation to listening skills. Will training people in intonation and other prosodic features result in better listening skills? Okay, for 10 weeks, the control group engaged in listening skills development with a traditional classroom-based teacher-led method. Okay, teacher does the normal class. Experimental group practiced listening comprehension using a teacher-less learning protocol heavily based on intonation training, using low-pass filters and a self-access web-based platform. Experimental group outperformed the control by about 2-to-1 on independent tests. Here are some results for you. Significance is 0.0, and so on. So, how can this be? So just by training people on intonation, they can become better listeners. How about that? Well, prosody is not all about pronunciation. This is one of the mistakes that people make. They think, oh, you're training them in pronunciation. In the world of English as a lingua franca, we don't care about pronunciation. Of course, it's not true, because if you didn't care, nobody would understand you. But anyway, prosody is not all about pronunciation. Here's something, the studies may look as if they're about pronunciation, but they're not. And look at this one. Don't know if you ever heard of it, but the now or never bottleneck is a very interesting concept. Morten Christiansen from Cornell University was doing some work on that, which is we cannot process every single bit of information that comes into our ears when we know its language. The brain just doesn't have enough room in its phonological working memory. The only way that we're going to do it is if we organize the input in ways which are optimal for our hearing and for our processing. So intonation, intonation helps us to organize the input in a way which is optimal for the brain to process later. And then just recently, it's still underway, the doctorate hasn't been awarded yet, my student Minh from Vietnam has done some interesting work on Vietnamese students learning improving pronunciation of voiceless consonants. Voiceless consonants. Vietnamese students have a number of pronunciation issues which impede intelligibility. One of them is voiceless consonants, including clusters and so on. So what she did was she compared learning improvement of voiceless consonants in two contexts: a traditional approach to pronunciation teaching. The students were told, went to a normal pronunciation class taught by an expert teacher of pronunciation, and a self-managed, teacherless, computer-delivered exercises to learn prosody, intonation only. Neither knew what the purpose of both groups thought that they were just doing a general a general pronunciation class. But this group did self-managed, teacherless, computer-delivered exercises to learn prosody and intonation only. There was no focus on any phonemes, voice or unvoiced, just learning of prosody. Students listened to and intensively repeated a miserable 5 sentences per week according to a self-administered protocol using low-pass filters only to facilitate intonation learning. When I say using low-pass filters only, I mean that there was no dancing associated with it. So we cut out the dancing component. The self-synchrony, the interactional synchrony that is normal in language just disappeared. There was no teaching of anything other than help on how to operate the software. I'm not going to show you that I've got a lot of details here, but I'm just going to show you one thing, that if you look at the last line here, the voiceless production in the passage reading, the control group scored less in the post-test than in the pre-test. And again, some other results here I won't talk about. So if you have a problem with voiceless consonants, just fix your intonation and your voiceless consonants will improve. Do you believe that? How can this be? Well, and the other question is, how can a voiced phenomenon, intonation, influence a voiceless phenomenon like voiceless consonants? How about that? What's the answer? And what about the traditional pronunciation class? And by the way, it didn't do very well, did it? But then it never does. Phoneme pronunciation, Dr. Weng Feng Wei. This was a different test, and I wanted to show you this specifically. We wanted to test the notion of corrective optimals for phonemes. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but just to show you, we did some work on some simple listen and repeat exercises using modified phonetic input. And the control group did exactly the same with untreated input. No teacher, no teaching. The hope was that the experimental group would outperform the control group. The experimental group received treatment where the particular vowels that were being studied were filtered on what is called an optimal. I can't give you the details. It's too long and complicated. But traditional verbotonal dogma is based on treatment with 1 octave with filtering. I mentioned that before. Well, we broke that. We thought we could verify that, perhaps do better, and perhaps modify verbotonal theory. We did this on 3 pairs of phonemes. We're just going to report here on ship and sheep, one of our favorites. 4 potential optimals were offered. We had a diagnostic phase. We identified which student preferred which filtering setting, and then they went off and did some exercises using those filters. Ordinary control group students did not have those filters. Pre-tests and post-tests were anonymized. Blind ratings were used. Pre-test was NSD. Sorry, no significant difference. Post-tests were, well, very small. So there was, what was interesting is that there was no production improvement except for the sound oo in the control group. It just didn't improve. What we see here on the right are some preferences. 89.2% of people liked optimal number 1, and 10% of people liked optimal number 2. The improvement ratio over the control group was 3.69 times, and the same for E as in sheep, the improvement ratio was 4.83 times using filters. Oops, come back. I'll play you an unfiltered sentence.
It is a ship with sheep on a sea of ripples near the sea.
This is not a real exercise. This is just a fun sentence. Here it is with filters.
It is a ship with sheep on a sea of ripples near the sea.
Okay? Once more.
It is a ship with sheep on a sea of ripples near the sea.
Okay, so that's the kind of filtering that was done and that was used as stimuli. So, all you have to do, maybe, I'm not sure about this, is identify correctly the optimals for problematic sounds, and you can self-correct, is that right? How can this be? So just listening and repeating is enough? Yes, but what are the parameters? And by the way, there's something interesting that we can talk about. You can actually get significant effects just by simple listen and repeat, but not the way we normally do it. Here's another one which actually goes beyond pronunciation, beyond listening, beyond these straight-out auditory, which is academic writing in Indonesian universities. Dr. Lala Bumela Sudimantara from Cirebon did his study in a face-to-face mode. I don't know. Lala, are you here? Say something if you're here.
Hi, Andrew. I'm here. Thank you.
Okay. So Dr. Lala is from the, I think it's the first Islamic university, cyber university in Indonesia, and I'm very glad to be connected with that study, with that development. And Dr. Lukman Baihaki from Palangkaraya, also in Indonesia, he did his study entirely online. They were fairly similar, but they were also distinct. But here was the issue. They came out of Charles Darwin University PhDs. They were supervised by Dr. Andrew Lian in Charles Darwin. And the approach had 3 prongs for both studies. That's why I've put them together. Verbotonalism with the thing that I call rhythms of academic writing, and reading for emotion, a model by Anya Lian, and then some aesthetics work done by Anya Lian using part of Ramachandran's models. Anya, are you there? No, okay, he's not.
Yes,
So those 3 things together.
of course I am.
Of course you are. Good morning. So the control group did a systemic functional linguistics-based JAR analysis taught by experienced SFL specialists. The ratings were double-blind by experienced academic editors. The control group, believe it or not, in both studies made no progress in either project and went from order to chaos in terms of the distribution. If you look at the standard deviations on the right here, you'll see the clustering for the experimental group. And if you look at where my mouse is, this large scattering after the pretest. One of the interesting things is that in Lala's study, the experimental group outperformed the control group by a factor of 11 to 1. The control group improved by 0.995, which was not significant. The experimental group improved by 11.189. Same principles. Some was teacherless, some was not. How can this be? What does it all mean? What about the SFL JAR-based training mandated by government and that everybody knows about? And that everybody teaches? Okay, now for an additional direction. I think I've still got 5 minutes, have I? Anyway, now
Yes.
You've heard of...
A few
thank
more
you.
minutes because we still need to allocate time for the Q&A. I'm sure people have questions.
Okay, I need to show you this. You've heard of FONF and FONFs and so on. So welcome to FONF with a PH, which stands for Focus on the Physical. We did some studies. I'll accelerate, sorry. We did some studies using dichotic input. Dichotic input is when you put one signal through one ear and the other unfiltered input through the other ear. We thought the following, or I thought the following, is that I did this as a study myself, and then it was taken up later on again. We had 3 configurations of signals that we used. Left ear filtered, in other words, left ear hears and the right ear hears this normal language. And then we swapped them. We had the left ear hearing the normal voice and the right ear hearing the unfiltered. Sorry. The left ear hears the unfiltered, the right ear hears the filtered. And then the third one, there is no filtering at all. Well, first of all, we confirmed that there is cerebral asymmetry. The treatment with the worst results consisted of left ear unfiltered and right ear filtered. And the best results were left ear filtered, right ear unfiltered. Why is that? Because the left ear sends signals to the right brain primarily and vice versa. So we were sending to the to the right brain, the signals that it prefers to treat. And the same with the left ear. We followed this up with a similar study where we used instruments to measure the impact on the brain of this dichotic listening. Dichotic listening, remember, is you hear different signals through the ears. And so this is what we did. We did an event response potential analysis of people listening to dichotic signals under different conditions. And we also used fMRI technology to look at blood flow studies. And this confirmed the studies that I had performed with raters. Right ear, left ear filtered, right ear unfiltered, lightens the load on the brain. Lightens the load on the brain. Is this of any value or of any interest to us? Well, we're now experimenting with different contexts for improving language performance using this discovery. And we did some work in China. We had a small but significant, reasonable effect size, 7% improvement of performances on identical student tasks, where the only difference was that one group had dichotic audio and the other one had normal audio. So how can this be? What else can we discover? And all of these self-teaching things have been confirmed by other projects that I'm not going to talk about today. So what does it mean when we do all of these experiments comparing traditional with new treatments and discover that the new is better than the old? Well, of course, we're all doing new things in order for it to be better than the old. But at the same time, we're learning about the old. We tend to forget the old in all of this, and it's worth remembering that the old is something that is there and used all the time. Now, it can mean that sometimes the old makes no difference at all, but that the power of the dogma is so great that change cannot happen. And we see that reflected constantly in the stagnation of proficiency scores at national level. For example, in the EF proficiency index scores that have not moved significantly for about 13 years. And that's not because of government short-sightedness or lack of motivation and so on. EF test takers are all volunteers who are both motivated, committed, spend money, and want to do well. So it would be interesting at this stage, not now, to look at commonalities between the experiments as well as differences. And why do we need all of this? What is the point of doing research? Aren't we teaching languages well? Aren't things good enough as they are? What is there left to learn on the pedagogic side? Well, look at this. These are the EF proficiency bands for ASEAN countries. And as you can see, except for Malaysia, well, you can't see because they're all overwritten, but I'll tell you. Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines are in the high range. Everybody else is either in the moderate range or in the low range. These are results from 2013 to 2024. Can you see anything interesting in the proficiency bands? Well, they are flatlining or going down. except for the ones at the top. They're flatlining. Nothing's changed in 10 years.
Sorry, Prof.
Look,
My
yes,
apologies. I think it's already time. Could
I'll
you
stop. I'm about to stop.
Thank you.
And look at this one. This is IELTS, TOEFL, and TOEIC. They're flatlining too. So finally, what does this all mean in terms of how we talk about learning, how we talk about language, how we talk about meaning? And more generally, how do we make sense of the world? In the end, that is one of the few things that really matters in life, because if we can't make sense of the world, we can't do anything at all. So that's the reason we need to keep going and doing what we're doing. That's the reason we are all here. And I will stop on that happy note. Have a wonderful time on what is truly a magnificent adventure. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Andrew. That was wonderful. Phonetics is close to my heart. In fact, that sentence you mentioned just now, a ship of sheep. I've actually used that on my students once before. So such a happy revisiting. We kindly request that you go back to your first slide because there'll be a short photo session. All right, as we present the certificate.
Oh, you want me to go, say that again? You want me to go back to my first slide?
First slide, your title slide. All right.
Okay.
Okay. And yes.
Just
all
a
right.
second. Yeah, let me just make it nicer.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to start. So this certificate of appreciation will be presented by Professor Shamim and Professor Azira. Are you able to turn on your cameras? Are your cameras on? Professor
It is
Azira?
on.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, mine is. Sorry.
Yes, yours is in. Prof. Azira, are you ready? Yes or no? Can you say yes? Prof. Azira? Prof. Azira?
Sorry, yes, I am.
And next we have Prof. Shamim. Can you please say yes if you are ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, this is what we want to see. In the pictures, we have all four of us. So please smile widely for the camera. I'm going to take a picture now. 3, 2, 1, smile. One more. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, thumbs up again. 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Big thumbs up. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, wonderful. Now, we probably have time for just one question from the audience. Is there a question from the audience? A quick question from the audience for Professor Andrew. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to look at the chat. Oh, there's a few items in the chat. Let's see what we have. Okay. So far, am I seeing any questions? We're seeing good morning messages. Okay. If you have any questions, all right, because we're chasing for time, we do have parallel sessions. For now, there are no questions so far. But if there are questions that arise later on, please feel free to send a message on the chat and we can contact Prof. Andrew later on. So thank you so much, Professor Andrew.
Are you sure there's
Thank
no
you.
question from anyone from the audience?
Okay, we're looking at the list. No one's...
Anyone want to